Okay, let's respond to some more comments. So Jim Golab 536 is commenting on my Do What the Rockefellers Do, part 2 of 2 video, which is showing incredible cash flow efficiency of whole life, especially on a juvenile. That shows how a policy on a newborn grows over time, not in terms of the total cash value and total death benefit, but in terms of the cash flow efficiency. That is, how much does your cash value grow year over year? So Jim just asked, can you scale this for inflation? Yeah, I could, Jim, but I'm trying to keep it simple. The more factors you add into any visual, the more confusing and, hard to follow it becomes. But yeah, you can. I just added in the comment, I'm explaining that actually dividends in a whole life insurance policy tend to be very inflation sensitive because of the way that insurance companies, the mutually held life insurance companies invest. They do something called maturity matching. Basically, they're investing in many things, but investment grade corporate bonds is one of the biggest things they invest in. And so you can look at it over time and you can see how as interest rates rise, dividends tend to rise. And as interest rates fall, dividends tend to fall. And when there was double digit inflation back in the 1970s, you saw whole life insurance paying double digit dividends. It definitely kept pace with inflation. And then when we had 0% interest rates more recently, where your savings account was paying you zero, whole life insurance continued to pay you a pretty decent return, like 4%, let's say, roughly over the long run. And that's tax free. 4% is a lot better than 0%. But yeah, I could scale it for inflation. It would just add another variable that would make the chart, the visual, a little more hard to follow. Could. Thanks for commenting, Jim. Mike Lemon or Mick Lemon says, "How does whole life work, and why does everyone call it a scam?" You know, good question. In terms of how does whole life work, we could do a whole host of series of videos on that. I've talked a lot about, but really, I would ask a prior question, which is before we even talk about whole life and how it works. Let's talk about your financial goals and your financial picture. Right? Let's back up a step. Think big picture. What are we really trying to accomplish? And what is your human psychology? When they talk about investments, they call it your investor DNA. Now, we're not talking about investments here. We're talking more broad. But the point is, we want to come up with a financial strategy that suits you psychologically, right? Not just from a numbers perspective, because there are multiple different financial strategies out there that could, in theory, work. The question is, what's the right strategy for you? And that has to do with, of course, your specific financial situation, but also your psychology. As an example, there are people out there who have been very successful by leveraging debt and, say, investing in real estate. But some people, their psychology is such that they're just not comfortable using debt. So for those people, it wouldn't be right to use debt. Why does everyone call it a scam? Well, I don't know who everyone is, but certainly there are people out there who call it names. My experience has been whenever someone calls a financial product a scam, the problem is not the financial product. The problem is the person calling it a name. What that person is saying is, I'm not ready to take the time to investigate it. So I'm just going to go in the most superficial thinking and just have a knee jerk reaction and call it a scam because it's not conventional wisdom. And I'm a herd animal. I just want to follow the herd. So whenever anything comes up that is not part of the herd, I have to just knee jerk reject it, call those people a bunch of nasty names and dismiss it as a scam. Right. And I'm glad you asked the question, why does everyone call it a scam? Because what your question implies is that they call it a scam, but then they don't justify it, right? They just call it a scam so they can dismiss it. I'm like, okay, please explain to me how whole life insurance is a scam, right? This financial vehicle that's been around for over 100 years, almost 200 years, that banks own a ton of, that corporations own a ton of, that wealthy people own a ton of, that has been a bedrock of the financial system, the traditional financial system, not the modern financial system, for generations. You're going to call that a scam? Really? You better justify that. And of course, they never do, right? They never do. So when you ask how does whole life work, I would say to back up and ask a prior question, which is what are you really trying to accomplish? Because whole life insurance is a financial tool. I think it's a great financial tool, but it's not for everybody and it doesn't apply in every single situation. And even where it does apply, we still have to design it properly for you. Whole life insurance is like real estate. Okay, there's a lot of different types of real estate and there's a lot of different ways you can use it. Real estate can be a phenomenal thing to buy, either as a place to live in or as an investment, or it could be terrible if you do it wrong. The same thing is true with whole life insurance. So, yeah, these people who call whole life insurance a scam, as I've said in prior videos, anyone who uses the word scam or ripoff, those people tend to be very close-minded. They tend to be very superficial thinkers, and they're just not willing to do the investigation. Every time I hear someone calling anything a scam or a ripoff, when I dig into it, I always find out, no, it's not a scam. No, it's not a ripoff. Maybe it's not for you. Maybe it doesn't apply in your specific situation, but there's always a use case for it. And I think it's very dangerous to go around calling things scams. Like it's like the boy who cried wolf. We should not throw that word scam. We should not throw that word around so loosely. There are some actual real scams out there, and they're typically pretty easy to spot, but there are some actual scams out there. And we don't want to create this culture of fear. We're always afraid of legitimate financial products because they're scams. And so then people never really do the investigation, unfortunately, and they fall into the natural psychological limitation that we all have, which is to follow the herd. We all have a tendency to follow the herd. It's hard to get us to think differently from what other people are doing. So, yeah, it's a good question. Why does everyone call it a scam? Again, that could be a whole series of videos in itself. I'm kind of psychoanalyzing these people. It is important to point out too that many of them who call whole life a scam, they call it that because they have a competing product. They have a competing financial philosophy that sells a competing financial product. And that's the reason why they attack whole life so much, because they have a competing product. Now, interestingly enough, whole life insurance and let's say like 401ks or mutual funds, they're not really competing products because whole life insurance is not an investment, whereas 401ks and mutual funds are investments. However, they are competing in this sense, in that the financial philosophy behind each of them tends to be different. What I've noticed is the more people start appreciating, let's say, the infinite banking concept or whole life insurance, and they start building capital over there, they tend to put less money or no money into 401ks and mutual funds. So even though technically they're not competing because they're not in the same category of financial products, I think there is a competing philosophy behind them. So your sort of standard financial advisors who want you to put as much of your money as possible into their mutual funds, into their retirement accounts, they tend to be very anti whole life because they view it as a competing product and because they don't make nearly as much money. There's a lot more profit to be made by taking assets under management than by selling whole life insurance. It is important to point out that these people who call whole life insurance a scam, oftentimes they have their own financial incentives for doing so, right? I sell whole life insurance. I'm a licensed life and health insurance agent. I don't hide the fact that I make money from selling whole life insurance. And I don't think that makes me evil, actually. And the people who jump to that, calling me evil for making a commission, are typically making money via a different route with a competing product. So there's nothing wrong, of course, with making money by selling mutual funds and 401ks. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Okay. But it is important to point out that those who attack whole life and call it all sorts of names and call people like me all sorts of horrendous names which cannot be printed, those people also have financial interests. They are making money in some way or form, and we all respond to financial incentives. So thanks for your comment, Mike. I appreciate it. I wish I could give you a better answer as to why does everyone call it a scam. It probably depends on the person. But I like the implication behind your question. When you ask why does everyone call it a scam, what you're implying is true, which is that those people never justify it. They just call it a scam, but they don't ever really explain how it's a scam. How are you being deceived? How is it dishonest? How does the product work against your best interest? How is the product stealing from you? It's not, obviously. Okay, Kamisi Norwood says, brilliant. Thank you, Kamisi, for the kind words. Appreciate that. He's commenting on my interview with Sebastian Boyer on infinite and velocity banking. Then Kamisi comments again, how do we incorporate purchasing income property into this equation? So here we're talking about combining first lien HELOC / velocity banking with infinite banking. I have a series of videos on that. And yeah, it's a good question, Kamisi. I don't know that I'm ever going to go super deep into a scenario like that for various reasons, but certainly if you want to schedule time with me, we can talk about it because absolutely there are people who do that. They'll have a first lien HELOC and they'll have whole life insurance and they'll be purchasing income generating properties. I think that's a great use case for both velocity banking and infinite banking, where you're using these tools to purchase a cash flowing asset like real estate. So it's a great question. We can certainly talk about together. I might cover it in some of my videos. I might not. We'll see. Kamisi Norwood also comments again, how can we make this work with a PLOC, a personal line of credit, say a $15,000 line, coupled with the WLIP, assuming one is debt-free with $2,500 of cash flow? Again, Kamisi, if you want to talk about specific situations, it would probably be better to schedule time with me. So you can do velocity banking with a personal line of credit rather than a home equity line. You can also do it with a business line. I would say typically a home equity line of credit is preferred. And in my opinion, the best vehicle is a first lien HELOC, a first lien home equity line of credit for a lot of reasons. First of all, you're typically going to get the best borrowing terms when you're borrowing against your primary residence. So you're going to get the lowest interest rate, the highest loan to value ratio, all those things. You're going to get access to a much larger line than you typically would with a personal line of credit. So you're saying a $15,000 line, right? With a home equity line of credit, especially if it's a first lien HELOC, you could easily get access to a six-figure line. But it can be done. For some people, that's where they have to start. Maybe you don't own a home. For some people, you have to start with that. And that's fine. And when you say WLIP, I assume that stands for whole life insurance product. I'm not sure what that means, or whole life insurance policy. You could make it work. That scenario is probably not one I would dive into on my YouTube channel just because it's not as advantageous. It doesn't apply to as many people, but you can do it. And I would advise it if that's your best option. So if you don't own a house, as an example, you could use a personal line of credit. Then Kamisi Norwood also made a positive comment on another video in this series. Thank you. Kamisi Norwood also gave another positive comment on another video in this series, combining first lien HELOC with infinite banking. Thank you, Kamisi. Appreciate it. This is really, I think, a very interesting topic, which is how do we combine these two complementary strategies, velocity banking and infinite banking? They are two different strategies, so you could look at them separately and you could do each individually on its own, which is fine. I think they both get even more powerful when you do them both together. So I think it becomes a 1 + 1 = 3 situation when you combine the first lien HELOC with the infinite banking concept. Okay, RJ here, RJGI2HF says, how do you know the Rockefellers do this? So he's commenting on my Do What the Rockefellers Do video series, which is just it's really talking about taking out whole life policies on children and why that can be such a great idea. He says, how do you know the Rockefellers do this? I've heard about this method from several life insurance agents, so I believe this is done, but how do you know for sure they do this? Have the Rockefellers said they do this? Have their family trusts been made public? Good question, RJ. I seriously doubt the Rockefellers are going to publicize anything any more than they have to. Like most very wealthy people, they want to keep everything as secretive as possible. They don't want anybody to know how much money they have or where it is, because the first rule of being rich is you never, ever, 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 ever let anybody else know you're rich. If people know there's a pot of gold, then it attracts all kinds of criminals. It attracts all kinds of parasites. It attracts all kinds of envy. It attracts all kinds of problems. So people who are truly wealthy, you usually wouldn't know it from looking at them. They go to lengths to disguise it, right, to hide it. The people, on the other hand, who make opulent displays of wealth, oftentimes are not very wealthy people. They're oftentimes very insecure people who feel the need to, I guess it makes them feel more important if they can make these displays of wealth. Oftentimes, those are people who are of somewhat average means, but they're willing to go to extreme lengths, like going into insane amounts of debt in order to appear wealthy. And I would also make a distinction between having lots of stuff versus having wealth. Having lots of stuff means you're buying a lot of liabilities, basically, as Robert Kiyosaki would say. But to answer your question, yeah, you can read What Would the Rockefellers Do by Garrett Gunderson. He's definitely spoken with the person who manages the Rockefeller family office. And a lot of the strategies we're talking about make perfect sense, even if the Rockefellers are not doing them. The fact is, the Rockefellers are doing it. And at least some of that can be verified through Garrett Gunderson's work and his research. But how much of it is public, I don't know. I suspect it's no more public than it has to be. So what's the structure of their trusts? I don't know if that's something that's publicly available information. And if it's not publicly available, I don't know why the Rockefellers would divulge any of that. I do know that this is, though, a pretty standard accepted strategy of intergenerational legacy planning, where you have what they call a dynasty trust. You use whole life insurance as the vehicle to pass on your wealth to the next generation. It's a very efficient form of wealth transfer, especially from a tax perspective or from other perspectives as well. Because in whole life insurance, the most important element is the passage of time. And a whole life insurance policy will be enforced for your whole life. So if you take out a whole life insurance policy on a newborn, that policy might be enforced for more than 80 years, which is phenomenal because every year a whole life policy is enforced, it gets better. So the sooner you start it, the better. But thanks for your comment, RJ. I appreciate it. Let me know if you do some research on your own and you find some of this stuff. Let me know. Okay. FK8A420 says, great content. Good job explaining. Thank you. He's also commenting on the Rockefeller video series. Thank you very much. Appreciate the comment. Okay. The Financial Advocacy Podcast says, not sure about compliance as much as it's about trademark protections. I understand that IBC is looking to enforce and protect their trademark. Thanks for the comment, Financial Advocacy. This is on part 3 of my interview with Caleb Gilliams. We talked a little bit about the Nash Institute and their trademarking of the infinite banking concept. Yeah, I guess it depends how you use the word compliance. I think it is about compliance, but probably not compliance in the sense that you're using the word. But the point that I'm making is that when you get bullied, there's sometimes a tendency to become a bully, right? So all of us in the financial sector have been victimized by these compliance departments whose job it is to be enforcers for the Wall Street cartel. They pretend to be protecting the consumer, but of course that's not what they're doing, obviously. The consumers didn't get together and write the rules. No, it was the Wall Street bullies who got together and wrote the rules, and the compliance departments then enforce those rules. And the way they sell it to the public is, oh, we're trying to protect the consumer against any number of things. And so what happens is then the Nelson Nash Institute has started to become like those compliance departments, right? Where they are now enforcing their own rules. So instead of responding to the Wall Street bullies by being different, by saying, hey, we're not going to bully other people, we're for a free exchange of ideas, and we're just going to promote the truth and encourage people to follow the truth about the infinite banking concept. And we're going to take the positive road of encouragement and support and growth rather than the negative view of playing this whack-a-mole game of trying to smack down people who do it in a way that we don't like. And by the way, it's fine to call people out. When I say smack down, I'm talking about sending someone a cease and desist letter, like actually taking legal action against them, as opposed to just calling. If you want to call them out publicly, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Go ahead and do it and say this person over here is not doing the infinite banking concept correctly. They're misusing the phrase. They're doing a bait and switch, and call them out for it. And you can say, hey, these are our officially authorized infinite banking agents, and these other people are not officially authorized. I have no problem with any of that. My problem is when you trademark a phrase and say, we now, these 3 words of the English language, infinite banking concept. So we now have a monopoly, and we are now going to use the government to go and bully people via cease and desist letters and beat them up for basically free speech. So I had a subsequent interview with Stefan Kinsella on intellectual property and trademark law. We talked about the problems with that and how this trademark enables legal bullying. So I agree with the mission of the Nelson Nash Institute in terms of promoting and supporting the infinite banking concept, promoting and supporting infinite banking agents who want to do that as their primary business, calling out people who are doing it the wrong way. I agree with them on all of it. I just don't agree with the methodology of using government action to bully people who are not doing it in the way that you think is the correct way. Call them out, that's fine. Just don't use government force to do it. So when you use the word compliance, I think you're just using it in a different context than I am. I do believe they have become a compliance department, whether they are actually a compliance department or not. But thanks for commenting. I appreciate it. Happy to have a discussion further about that. Better Wealth, this is Caleb Gilliam, says, Logan, thank you for having me on. Thanks for coming on the show, Caleb. I appreciate that. Just commenting on our interview series, which we did in 3 parts. Anna Fawcett comments, thank you, Don Graves. Love listening to you. Thanks, Anna, for commenting. This is on one of my interviews with Don Graves on reverse mortgages. So Don Graves is our resident expert on reverse mortgages. We spoke about how those can help you in retirement. We also did a more recent video on combining a whole life insurance policy with a reverse mortgage. Now the two can work together and be complementary financial tools. So here we have our series on first lien HELOC and velocity banking, answering objections with DeAndre Clayton. So I did a whole series on that. I've done a series on answering objections to the infinite banking concept as well. And it's ongoing. I'm sure I'll add to both as more people comment. So Daryl Newman comments and says, the only 2 drawbacks I see right off the bat is if you're not disciplined and you have access to your equity, you could put yourself in a tight spot. And unless that money is going to fix your house up, you cannot write off the interest on your taxes on a first position HELOC. Thanks for commenting, Daryl. Yes, I agree. If you're not disciplined, this is probably not a good strategy for you. So if you refinance your mortgage into a first lien HELOC and now you have access to 90% of the equity of your house, if you are not disciplined about paying that down and or using the equity responsibly, then you should not be doing this because it's just going to work against you. You're going to pull that equity and spend it, and you're never going to pay it down. So I completely agree with you. In terms of the interest deduction, I believe, and I'm not a loan officer, but my understanding is the tax deductions work the same. Whether it's a HELOC or whether it's a mortgage, as long as it's on your primary residence, the tax deductions work exactly the same. If you can write off the interest on your mortgage, you can write off the interest on your HELOC. For some reason, this is an objection that comes up a lot, and I have no idea where this misconception comes from. But as far as I know, there's no difference. You can write off the interest on a mortgage, and you can write off the interest on a HELOC exactly the same way. There's really no difference in terms of tax treatment because it is a home equity loan, debt instrument against your primary house. From a tax perspective, it's the same thing. But thanks for commenting, Daryl. I appreciate it. And maybe I can get a loan officer on. Maybe I can ask Anthony to clarify that and make sure that it is the same. One other thing I'd point out too is that I think a lot more people take the standard deduction these days since they increase the size of the standard deduction. So oftentimes that becomes a moot point because you're only really deducting it off of your taxes if you're itemizing, is my understanding. Again, I'm not licensed to give tax advice and I'm not a loan officer, so take what I say with a grain of salt. And who knows, maybe things will change. But my understanding is, from a tax deduction of the interest standpoint, mortgage and HELOC works exactly the same way. No difference. But thanks for commenting. I agree with you about the lack of financial discipline. I agree with you. So Travis Smith comments on my first lien HELOC video saying, I like this concept, but you might update numbers with a more realistic HELOC rate. Most HELOCs, I'd say 9% would be minimum, but more likely 10 to 11%. Thanks for your reply, Travis. I appreciate it. Yeah, that video in terms of the numbers are dated, sure, but I don't want to have to keep updating it. The idea is to show the concept. So if I update it, I'll have to keep updating it. to keep it current with interest rates, and I'd rather not do that. It's just a lot of work. I'd rather just leave it as it is. But you're right. The video was made at a time when interest rates were really at historic lows in hindsight, very significantly lower than they are today. But most HELOCs, I'd say 9%. Well, actually, Travis, I think you're talking there about second position HELOCs. First position HELOCs tend to have lower interest rates. At the time of this video, yeah, I think the first position HELOCs were more in the 7 to 8% range. So a second position HELOC probably would be 9%, but a first lien HELOC will have a lower interest rate, right? Because again, the bank is in first position rather than second position. So there's less risk to the bank. First lien HELOCs, generally speaking, are going to have lower interest rates than your standard second position HELOCs, or sometimes they're in third position, right? So yeah, thanks for commenting, Travis. Appreciate it. The LMK comments on my Infinite Banking Concept Answering Objections series. The comment says, I'm curious, if insurance companies aren't big fans of IBC with whole life, then why are many of these companies proponents of using IUL for retirement withdrawals? Genuinely curious about this. Thanks for your comment, the LMK. I appreciate it. I cannot really answer this question. I'm speculating now. I'm speculating. Now, when you say many of these companies, many of the companies, this is probably dated, but let's say some of the companies that we do infinite banking with do not even have IULs. They only have whole life insurance. They do not have IULs. And for those of you in the audience who are not familiar with the term, IUL is an indexed universal life policy. It is different from a whole life insurance policy. And according to the Nash Institute, according to Nelson Nash, according to others, including David McKnight, who's a big proponent of IULs, you cannot really use IULs for infinite. There's a number of reasons for that. What the differences between whole life insurance and index universal life insurance could be a whole series of videos on its own. But for the purposes of responding to this comment, if you want to do infinite banking, you need whole life insurance. Again, as to why they're proponents of using IUL for retirement withdrawals, I guess you'd have to talk to the companies themselves. And I would say that while insurance companies are not big fans of IBC with whole life, they're not necessarily opposed to it. It depends which company you're talking about. Some companies are more friendly to the idea than others. All of them allow it because the infinite banking concept is not changing anything or adding anything to the whole life insurance policy itself. It's sort of like the insurance company is the home builder and we're the real estate investor, right? So the insurance company builds the home and then we're the ones who decide, okay, how do we best leverage that house? How do we rent it out, get the most cash flow, leverage it the best? So the home builder really doesn't care how we're using the house. He just wants to sell it to us. And then however we use it is up to us. Same thing here. The insurance company sells us the whole life insurance policy. They're, of course, they're a partner in it, but they don't really care how you're using the policy. And I think part of the reason why some of them are not big fans of the infinite banking concept is because there are a lot of misunderstandings out there about what it actually is. There are certainly people who are promoting it and selling it in the wrong way. I agree with the Nelson Nash Institute that that is a problem. It's like anything else. When any financial strategy or financial product starts to get traction, there are going to be people who misuse it in order to try and make more money. That's just that this always happens, right? It happens in real estate all the time. It doesn't mean real estate is a bad asset. It doesn't necessarily mean these real estate investing strategies are bad just because there are bad actors who try to use them to make more money and using them in the wrong way. It's a good question. I'm totally speculating. But I think it is important to point out that the insurance companies that we work with, they don't really care. They're not for or against the infinite banking concept. It's just one of many ways that you can use whole life insurance is the way they view it. They personally are never going to like put a stake in the ground and say we support infinite banking, just the same way they're probably never going to put a stake in the ground and say that they support any particular financial strategy. What they're doing is being a good insurance company, providing the product. And then how we use it is really up to us. Yeah, and then the LMK, we talked a little further actually because this guy is thinking about, I think he is a life insurance agent and talking about maybe joining the team. If you are a life insurance agent and you want to join my team, please reach out to me. If you're someone who's not a life insurance agent, but you're thinking about getting into it as a side business or maybe as your primary business, maybe you're already doing infinite banking. In my opinion, if you're already doing infinite banking or if you're interested in the infinite banking concept, I think at some point it makes sense to get your license and at least do this as a side. There are a lot of advantages to it. So, yeah, I'm always happy to speak with people who are thinking about getting into the business. Thanks for your comment. I appreciate it. Gabu Sagas 777 says infinite banking is greater than velocity banking. Now, using velocity banking tools to boost your infinite banking, then you are gold. Thanks for your comment. Appreciate it. I agree. Infinite banking is more foundational than velocity banking. I totally agree with you. Velocity banking is a great strategy. I think it can help with a lot of things, especially efficient elimination of debt, but it's not as foundational as infinite banking because it doesn't enable you to become your own banker. When you are doing velocity banking, you are still working with a bank. The bank provides you with, as an example, the home equity line. Right. So I agree. I agree with you. Both are good though, and I think both can be very complementary. So agreed. Thank you for your comment. Appreciate it. Nelson Advisors comments, thank you for having me on again. This is Peter Nelson, of course, of Nelson Insurance Advisors. He's been on the show multiple times, of course. Peter, thank you. We always appreciate your time. So I think that's about it for now. We'll respond to more comments in another video. Thanks everyone for commenting. Appreciate the engagement.